There are many approaches to awakening which emphasize deconstructing the self. And in this video I'm going to talk a bit about why I don't think that's a good idea and why that can even be dangerous for many people. So the basic insight or the intention behind wanting to deconstruct the self is of course quite understandable, because our suffering very easily can be traced back to this sense we have of being a separate self, of being a finite, localized someone, a constricted identity. So it's quite natural that when we trace our suffering back to this identity, that we would maybe want to deconstruct it in order to become free of it. When we undertake this project, however, there are two issues which people can run into quite commonly. The first issue we can run into when deconstructing the self is that when we are no longer feeling ourselves to be the separate someone, all of a sudden all the healthy defense mechanisms we have acquired over the years are also no longer present. So what winds up happening for many people is that they, in a sense, get flooded with all sorts of overwhelming emotional or traumatic material. Previously, maybe they were able to keep it down, or they were able to cope with it somehow from their identity of a separate self. But now that this is no longer here, it's in a sense like being left out in the cold. And that can really be quite overwhelming for many people, and in the worst case even lead to a sort of dissociation. But there's another quite big issue when we attempt to deconstruct the self. And this is simply that we might be able to deconstruct the self or have a glimpse of the emptiness of the self in a moment of inquiry or a moment of rest. But then when we re-engage with life, what's going to happen? Well, one possibility is that this sense of self re-arises, and now in a sense it comes back with a vengeance, meaning that it's there again, but there in an even more unhealthy way. It reconstructs, but it doesn't reconstruct in a functional way. Of course, sometimes people notice that happening, and then, because they are so fixated on wanting to deconstruct the self, try to suppress that re-arising of the separate self. So essentially, they then have a kind of internal battle where there is that sense of self arising, and a part of them now tries to suppress that. So again, the simple result here is that it produces quite a lot of suffering. So what is the alternative to deconstructing the self? Well, the alternative is to simply see that what we call the separate self is a part of our embodiment, but is not what we essentially are. It is a pattern of thinking and feeling. It is a worldview, a perspective, which has been concretized and put into the seat of the self. So now that it's allowed to step back and relax, we very crucially don't try to deny the existence of this part. Because, as I said earlier, when we try to do that, it will in a sense fight back and come back even stronger. It has stepped back, but it is not going anywhere. And now that we have that bit of spaciousness here, there is the possibility of recognizing what we really are, what our true nature is. And what do we find here when all these parts have relaxed and stepped back? We simply find awareness itself. The awareness which you've actually been all along. The awareness as which you are receiving my words right now. What we are seeing then is that as this awareness, we can now participate in conventional life without having to do so from the perspective of a separate part. And beautifully and quite crucially, as this basic essential awareness, we are naturally intimate with all parts of our embodiment, with this protector, with this problem solver, with this ego manager. They're all perfectly welcome here. No one is being abandoned. The whole family is here, we could say, but no part is in the driver's seat. So instead of having deconstructed the self, we have instead seen what the true self is and how it relates to these seemingly separate parts of us. So nothing is being deconstructed. There is no need to say that something is unreal. We're simply here in this effortless presence, this natural wakefulness. Totally free and unburdened, and yet naturally intimate with the world and our embodiment. So simply familiarize with this and enjoy this.